Let me ask you something uncomfortable. If money has been a struggle for you, month after month, year after year, at what point do you stop blaming your job, your circumstances, your upbringing, and start looking at the one thing that's been present in every single financial decision you've ever made? Your brain, not your income, not the economy, not your boss, your family, or the system, your brain. Because here's what nobody is telling you. The reason you're broke, or the reason you keep returning to broke no matter how many times you climb out, has almost nothing to do with money. It has everything to do with the invisible psychological architecture running silently beneath every financial choice you make. You've tried budgeting, you've tried saving, you've tried side hustles and overtime and cutting expenses, and yet the same patterns keep showing up. The account drains, the opportunities slip, the progress stalls, and you wonder why. You tell yourself you just need more discipline, more willpower, a better strategy. You are wrong. The problem isn't your strategy. The problem is your brain has been wired, through years of conditioning, emotional association, and neurochemical reinforcement, to return you to a specific financial state. Like a thermostat set to a temperature you never chose, your brain monitors your financial reality and quietly, consistently, invisibly works to bring you back to its set point. That set point is keeping you broke. And until you understand exactly how it works, nothing will change. Not the raise, not the business, not the financial advisor, nothing. But here's what changes everything. Once you understand the exact psychological mechanisms that keep you financially stuck, you can dismantle them, systematically, permanently, not through motivation or positive thinking, but through the same process of rewiring that trapped you in the first place. By the time you finish this, you will understand why your brain treats financial growth as a threat. You will know the specific thought patterns, emotional associations, and behavioral loops that make poverty feel safer than prosperity. And you will have a step-by-step framework for reprogramming your financial identity from the ground up. This isn't about budgeting tips or investment strategies. Those tools are useless until the brain using them is rewired. This is about going deeper than any financial book has ever taken you, into the neuroscience, the psychology, and the hidden belief systems that are silently running your financial life. The choice to change starts the moment you stop blaming everything outside you and start examining everything inside you. That moment is now. This isn't about budgeting tips or investment strategies. Those tools are useless until the brain using them is rewired. This is about going deeper than any financial book has ever taken you, into the neuroscience, the psychology, and the hidden belief systems that are silently running your financial life. The choice to change starts the moment you stop blaming everything outside you and start examining everything inside you. That moment is now. Chapter 1. The uncomfortable truth about why you're still broke. Most people believe poverty is a circumstance. They believe it happens to them. They believe it's the result of bad luck, bad timing, a bad economy, or a bad starting point in life. And so they spend their entire lives waiting for circumstances to change, waiting for the right opportunity, waiting for someone to give them a chance, waiting for the world to finally stop working against them. They will wait forever. Because here is the brutal truth that almost nobody has the courage to say out loud. For the overwhelming majority of people who struggle with money, the problem is not external. The problem is internal. The problem is not what's happening around them. The problem is what's happening inside them, in their beliefs, in their emotional associations, in the unconscious programs running in the background of their mind every single hour of every single day. This is not about blame. This is about power. Because the moment you accept that your financial situation is primarily a product of your internal world rather than your external circumstances, you gain something that most people never have. You gain the ability to change it. Think about the people in your life who always seem to have money. not because they inherited it, not because they got lucky, but because no matter what happens to them, job loss, unexpected expenses, economic downturns, they always seem to find a way back to financial stability. And then think about the people who always seem to struggle, who get ahead briefly, then fall back, who receive windfalls and lose them, who make more money but never seem to have more money. Because here is the brutal truth that almost nobody has the courage to say out loud. For the overwhelming majority of people who struggle with money, the problem is not external. The problem is internal. The problem is not what's happening around them. The problem is what's happening inside them, in their beliefs, in their emotional associations, in the unconscious programs running in the background of their mind every single hour of every single day. This is not about blame. This is about power. Because the moment you accept that your financial situation is primarily a product of your internal world rather than your external circumstances, you gain something that most people never have. You gain the ability to change it. Think about the people in your life who always seem to have money, not because they inherited it, not because they got lucky, but because no matter what happens to them, job loss, unexpected expenses, economic downturns, they always seem to find a way back to financial stability. And then think about the people who always seem to struggle, who get ahead briefly, then fall back, who receive windfalls and lose them, who make more money but never seem to have more money. What separates these two groups isn't intelligence, it isn't education, it isn't even work ethic. It's their relationship with money. It's the unconscious beliefs they carry about what they deserve, what's possible, what money means, and what happens to people like them. Studies of lottery winners reveal something that should stop you cold. 70% of lottery winners go bankrupt within 5 years of their windfall. They received life-changing amounts of money, and within 5 years, most of them were back to where they started, or worse. The money didn't change them because the money couldn't change the thing that needed to change, the program running inside their heads. This is not a story about lottery winners. This is a story about you. Because the same force that pulled those lottery winners back to financial struggle is the same force pulling you. It's just operating at a smaller scale, in quieter ways, with less obvious consequences. But it's the same force, and it has a name. Psychologists call it the financial thermostat. Behavioral economists call it the wealth set point. Neuroscientists call it homeostatic financial regulation. You can call it whatever you want. What matters is understanding what it does. Your brain has decided, based on your upbringing, your experiences, your emotional associations, and the beliefs you absorbed from the people around you, what level of financial reality is normal for you. What level feels safe? What level feels like home? And whenever your financial situation deviates significantly from that level, whether upward or downward, your brain activates powerful psychological and behavioral mechanisms to return you to your set point. This is why the raise doesn't change things. This is why the side hustle money disappears. This is why you can read every personal finance book ever written and still find yourself in the same financial position 5 years from now. Because the books give you strategies, and strategies are useless when the brain implementing them is running a program designed to fail. The first step toward financial freedom is not learning a new strategy, it's understanding the old program. And that program starts in a place most people never examine. Chapter 2. How your brain learned to fear money. You were not born with a fear of money. You were not born with limiting beliefs about wealth. You were not born believing that rich people are greedy, or that wanting more makes you selfish, or that people like you don't get to have financial freedom. You learned all of those things, and you learned them before you were old enough to question whether they were true. The human brain is most malleable in the first 12 years of life. During this period, The brain is essentially a recording device, absorbing information, patterns, and emotional associations from the environment, and storing them as foundational beliefs about how the world works. The problem is that this recording happens without any filter, without any critical analysis, without any ability to evaluate whether what's being absorbed is true, healthy, or useful. So if you grew up in a household where money was always scarce, your brain recorded that as the norm. If you heard phrases like, "we can't afford that," or "money doesn't grow on trees," or "rich people are just lucky," or "money is the root of all evil," those phrases didn't just pass through your consciousness, they became embedded in your neural architecture as foundational truths about the nature of financial reality. And here's where it gets dark. Those early emotional associations between money and stress, money and conflict, money and shame, money and danger, were encoded into your amygdala, the brain's threat detection system. The same system that fires when you're physically in danger began to associate the concept of money with threat. And once the amygdala encodes something as threatening, it works constantly to keep you away from it, to protect you from it, even when what it's protecting you from is the very thing you desperately want. This creates a paradox that destroys most people financially. They want money desperately on a conscious level, and they fear it, avoid it, and self-sabotage around it on an unconscious level. And the unconscious mind is always more powerful than the conscious mind, always, without exception. Think about what happens when you actually start to make more money. Something shifts. Maybe you start spending more recklessly. Maybe you suddenly feel guilty about your success. Maybe you make an impulsive investment that wipes out your gains. Maybe you simply lose interest in the habits that generated the income. Maybe you unconsciously create situations at work that jeopardize your position. These aren't random events. These are your brain implementing its protection protocol. Your brain detected that you were moving too far from your financial set point, in this case, too far above it, and activated a series of behaviors designed to pull you back to familiar territory, back to the financial identity it knows how to maintain. The neuroscience behind this is precise. When you begin accumulating money beyond your psychological comfort zone, your anterior cingulate cortex, the part of your brain that monitors for conflicts between your current reality and your expected reality, registers an error. It signals that something is wrong, that the situation needs to be corrected, and your brain responds to this signal the same way it responds to any perceived threat. It activates mechanisms to eliminate the discrepancy, to restore homeostasis, to bring you home. Home, in this case, is broke. Understanding this process doesn't make it less powerful immediately, but it begins to strip away the most destructive belief most financially struggling people carry. The belief that they're failing because of personal weakness, lack of discipline, or bad luck. You're not failing because you're weak. You're failing because you're operating a sophisticated financial success program on a brain that was programmed for something completely different. That's not a character flaw. That's a software problem. And software can be rewritten. Chapter 3. The Poverty Mindset. What it actually is and where it hides. Everyone has heard the term poverty mindset. Most people think they understand what it means. They picture someone who is pessimistic about money, who doesn't believe in themselves, who gives up easily. And while those qualities are part of it, the poverty mindset is far more sophisticated, far more subtle, and far more deeply embedded than most people realize. The poverty mindset is not a single belief. It's an entire architecture of interlocking thoughts, emotional associations, behavioral patterns, and identity structures that work together to maintain financial limitation. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't show up as an obvious voice in your head saying you don't deserve to be wealthy. It shows up in the quiet, seemingly reasonable choices you make every single day. It shows up when you talk yourself out of asking for a raise because you don't want to seem greedy. It shows up when you avoid looking at your bank account, because seeing the number makes you feel anxious. It shows up when you spend money you don't have on things you don't need, because buying something gives you a brief moment of control in a financial situation that otherwise feels out of control. The first component is scarcity thinking. This is the deep, often unconscious belief that there is not enough money, not enough opportunity, not enough success to go around. Scarcity thinkers see life as a zero-sum game where someone else's gain is automatically their loss. They hoard resources, including information, connections, and opportunities, because sharing feels like losing. They hesitate on decisions because any wrong move might be catastrophic in a world with no margin for error. They can't enjoy what they have because they're too busy being terrified of losing it. Scarcity thinking manifests in the way you talk about money. If you catch yourself saying things like, "I could never afford that," or "that's for rich people," or "you have to have money to make money," you are speaking the language of scarcity. And every time you speak that language, you reinforce the neural pathways that maintain your scarcity reality. The second component is the deserving gap. This is the painful chasm between what you consciously want and what you unconsciously believe you deserve. The deserving gap is responsible for more financial self-sabotage than any external circumstance ever could be. Because no matter how much you strategize, plan, and work toward financial goals, if your unconscious mind does not believe you deserve to achieve them, it will find ways to make sure you don't. The deserving gap is created by a lifetime of experiences that taught you, directly or indirectly, that you are not the kind of person who gets to have wealth. Maybe you were told as a child that wanting too much was selfish. Maybe you watched the people around you fail financially and absorbed that as evidence of what's possible for someone like you. Maybe you made financial mistakes in the past that you never fully forgave yourself for. Whatever the origin, the deserving gap operates as a ceiling that your unconscious mind refuses to let you break through. The third component is the identity lock. This is perhaps the most powerful and least discussed aspect of the poverty mindset. Your brain maintains a coherent sense of identity at all costs. It needs you to remain recognizable to yourself. And if your identity, the story you tell yourself about who you are, includes financial struggle as a core feature, then any significant financial success will feel like a threat to your sense of self. This is why some people become deeply uncomfortable when they start making more money. Not because the money is bad, but because financial success doesn't fit the identity they've spent years constructing and reinforcing. The wealthy person they're becoming doesn't feel like them, and the brain, in its relentless pursuit of psychological consistency, will do almost anything to return them to the identity that feels familiar, even if that identity is one of financial limitation. The fourth component is the comparison trap. Poverty mindset thinkers measure their financial reality against others constantly, but they do it in a specific, destructive way. They don't study successful people to understand and model what they're doing right. They compare themselves to successful people to feel worse about themselves, then use that worse feeling as evidence that success is for other people, not for them. This comparison trap keeps them permanently stuck between two equally destructive emotional states: envy of those who have more and contempt for those who want more. Both states serve the same function. They keep the person exactly where they are. Recognizing these components in yourself is not a comfortable process, but it is a necessary one, because you cannot change a program you don't know is running. Chapter 4. The Neuroscience of Financial Self-Sabotage. Your brain does not want you to be rich. Let me be more precise about that. The primitive, survival-oriented parts of your brain, the parts that evolved over millions of years to keep your ancestors alive, associate financial growth with risk and financial familiarity with safety. And in the hierarchy of your brain's priorities, safety always defeats growth. Understanding the neurological mechanisms behind financial self-sabotage is not an academic exercise. It is the most practical thing you can do. Because once you can see the exact circuit firing inside your skull every time you make a financially destructive decision, you gain the ability to interrupt it, and interrupting it is how you begin to change it. The first mechanism is the dopamine trap. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter most associated with motivation, reward, and pleasure. But here's what most people get wrong about dopamine. It is not actually released when you receive a reward. It is released when you anticipate a reward. Dopamine is the chemical of craving, not of satisfaction. This distinction is critical for understanding financial self-sabotage, because the dopamine system does not care whether the reward you're anticipating is good for your long-term financial health. It only cares about the immediate anticipation of relief from discomfort. So when you're anxious about your financial situation and you decide to buy something, anything, to get a brief hit of control and pleasure, your dopamine system fires in anticipation of that purchase. And that dopamine hit feels like wisdom. It feels like a good idea. It feels like exactly the right thing to do. It's not. But your brain doesn't know that. Your brain just knows that spending has historically produced relief, and relief is the reward it's chasing. So it creates the craving. You follow the craving. You spend the money. You feel briefly better. And then the anxiety returns, often worse than before, and the cycle locks tighter. This is not weak character. This is dopamine doing exactly what it was designed to do. The problem is that it was designed for a world where immediate reward was the only kind of reward that mattered. In that world, instant gratification was survival. In the modern financial world, instant gratification is destruction. The second mechanism is cortisol-driven avoidance. Cortisol is your primary stress hormone. When cortisol levels are high, your brain narrows its focus to immediate threats and activates avoidance behavior toward anything that triggers more stress. For most people with financial struggles, money itself has become a source of stress, and so high cortisol levels, which are already elevated by financial struggle, cause the brain to avoid engaging with financial reality altogether. This is why you stop checking your bank account. This is why you let bills pile up without opening them. This is why you change the subject when conversations turn to money. This is why you feel a physical sensation of discomfort, a tightening in the chest, a knot in the stomach when you think about your financial situation. Your cortisol-drenched brain has decided that financial reality is a threat to be avoided, and avoidance feels like relief in the short term. In the long term, it is catastrophic. The third mechanism is what neuroscientists call the default mode network. The default mode network is the collection of brain regions that activates when your mind is not focused on a specific external task. It's the mental chatter, the background noise, the voice that narrates your experience of yourself and the world. And for most people with a poverty mindset, the default mode network is running a continuous loop of financially limiting thoughts. I'll never get ahead. Money always runs out. There's never enough. I'm not good with money. Success is for other people. These thoughts are not conscious decisions. They are automatic. They run beneath the level of deliberate thought, and they shape your emotional relationship with money, your confidence in financial decisions, and your beliefs about what's possible for you, without you ever consciously choosing them. The fourth mechanism is neurological pattern matching. Your brain is a prediction machine. Its primary function is to predict what will happen next based on what has happened before, then prepare your body and behavior accordingly. If your history is full of financial struggle, your brain has built detailed predictive models of financial failure, and it applies these models to every new financial situation you encounter, not because it wants you to fail, but because it is doing its job, using the past to predict the future. The problem is that this pattern matching system doesn't know the difference between a prediction and a program. When it predicts financial failure based on past data, it also begins to create the conditions for that failure. It makes you less likely to take the actions that would lead to success, more likely to engage in behaviors that confirm the prediction, more likely to interpret neutral events as evidence of inevitable failure. Your brain's prediction system becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it runs on autopilot. Understanding these four mechanisms, the dopamine trap, cortisol avoidance, the default mode network, and neurological pattern matching, is the foundation of financial reprogramming. You cannot fight these mechanisms through willpower. Willpower is a finite resource that these ancient, deeply embedded systems will always outlast. You can only rewire them. And rewiring them requires a different approach entirely, which is exactly where we're going next. Chapter 5. The hidden language of your financial identity. You have a financial identity. Most people don't know they have one, which is precisely why it controls them so completely. Your financial identity is the set of beliefs, stories, and self-concepts that define, at the deepest level, what kind of relationship with money you are allowed to have. It answers questions like, what do people like me do with money? What level of financial success is realistic for someone with my background? What does wealth say about a person's character? What happens when people like me try to get ahead? These are not abstract philosophical questions. They are operating instructions. Your brain uses the answers to these questions, the answers you absorbed unconsciously over years of lived experience, to guide every financial decision you make. And if those answers are rooted in limitation, in shame, in fear, or in the experiences of people who never escaped their financial set point, then your financial identity is programming you for exactly the financial reality you're trying to escape. Your financial identity communicates through a specific language, and learning to hear that language is one of the most powerful things you can do, because once you can hear it, you can challenge it, and once you can challenge it, you can change it. The first dialect of your financial identity is the language of worthiness. Listen carefully to what you say, out loud and internally, when money comes up. Do you say things like, I deserve better than this? Or do you say things like, I'm lucky to have what I have? Do you invest in yourself and your development without guilt? Or do you hesitate, feel selfish, and talk yourself out of opportunities to grow? The worthiness language tells your brain whether you belong in a different financial reality or whether you need to stay where you are. The second dialect is the language of possibility. This is the quiet running commentary about what's achievable for you specifically. Not in general, not theoretically. For you, for someone with your background, your education, your family history, your track record. The possibility language is often disguised as realism, as pragmatism, as not getting your hopes up. But underneath the reasonable-sounding language of caution is a deeply held belief that certain financial realities are simply not available to you, that they're for other people, people with better starts, better connections, better luck. The third dialect is the language of identity consistency. This is the voice that sounds like you when it says things like, I've never been good with money, or that's just how I am, or this is how our family has always been. The identity consistency language is the most seductive because it sounds like self-awareness. It sounds like honesty. But it is actually the most powerful form of self-limitation there is. Because when you define your financial limitations as a fixed part of who you are, rather than as a learned pattern that can be unlearned, you remove any reason to try to change them. The fourth dialect is the language of moral contradiction. This is the voice that tells you money is complicated at a values level, that wealthy people are greedy, that wanting more makes you materialistic, that financial success would make you different from the people you love, that pursuing money would require you to compromise your integrity. This dialect is particularly dangerous because it attaches financial limitation to virtue. It makes staying broke feel noble. It creates an unconscious equation where financial struggle equals good person and financial success equals bad person. And no amount of financial strategy can override a brain that believes success would make it morally inferior. Learning to hear these dialects in your own internal monologue is not comfortable, but it is essential, because you cannot change a story you can't hear yourself telling. The moment you can catch yourself speaking the language of financial limitation in your thoughts, your words, your casual assumptions about what's possible, is the moment you can begin to write a different story. And the story you tell yourself about money is not a reflection of reality. It is a creator of reality. Your brain builds the world it believes it will find. Change the story, and you change the world your brain builds. Chapter 6. The 7 Behaviors of Financially Stuck People. Financial self-sabotage does not always look dramatic. It rarely shows up as one catastrophic decision that destroys everything. More often, it shows up as a pattern of small, quiet, seemingly reasonable behaviors that collectively keep you locked in financial limitation. These behaviors feel normal because they're familiar. They feel justified because there's always a logical reason for each of them. But the cumulative effect of these behaviors, compounded over months and years, is the difference between financial freedom and financial imprisonment. Recognizing these behaviors in yourself is not about self-judgment. It's about awareness. Because behavior you can see is behavior you can change. Behavior running on autopilot is behavior that runs your life. The first behavior is lifestyle inflation without asset accumulation. Every time income increases, a raise, a bonus, a new job, expenses rise to match it. The nicer apartment, the newer car, the upgraded wardrobe, the more expensive habits. Recognizing these behaviors in yourself is not about self-judgment. It's about awareness. Because behavior you can see is behavior you can change. Behavior running on autopilot is behavior that runs your life. The first behavior is lifestyle inflation without asset accumulation. Every time income increases, a raise, a bonus, a new job, expenses rise to match it. The nicer apartment, the newer car, the upgraded wardrobe, the more expensive habits. The money comes in and the money goes out, and the gap between them never widens. This behavior is so normalized in modern culture that most people don't even recognize it as self-sabotage. But it is. It is the financial thermostat doing its job, keeping you at your set point by ensuring that more income never translates to more wealth. The investment you've been researching for months without ever acting on. Decision avoidance feels like prudence, like you're waiting until you have more information, more time, more certainty. But in financial life, the cost of inaction is always compounding. Every month you delay a financial decision, you pay a price. And most financially stuck people are paying that price continuously, invisibly, on dozens of decisions simultaneously. The third behavior is comfort spending. This is the use of purchasing to regulate emotional states. When you're stressed, you spend. When you're bored, you spend. When you're sad, you spend. When you're celebrating, you spend. The spend is not really about the thing being purchased. It's about the brief neurochemical relief that the act of purchasing provides. The brief hit of dopamine that temporarily overrides the cortisol of financial stress. Comfort spending is financial self-medication, and like all forms of self-medication, it treats the symptom while making the underlying condition worse. The fourth behavior is social spending beyond means. This is spending driven not by genuine desire, but by the fear of social judgment. Buying things you can't afford to keep up with peers. Saying yes to social obligations that strain your finances because saying no feels like admitting failure. Spending on appearances. The clothes, the car, the vacations posted to social media. Because appearing financially comfortable feels safer than being financially comfortable. Social spending is not about the money, it's about the identity. It's the financial expression of the deserving gap. Spending money, you don't have to project an image of being someone you're not yet allowed to believe you actually are. The fifth behavior is knowledge hoarding without action. This is the consumption of financial information, self-help content, podcasts, books, and courses, without any corresponding change in behavior. Knowledge hoarding feels productive. It gives the sensation of working on the problem without requiring the discomfort of actually changing. It is the intellectually sophisticated version of avoidance, and it is devastatingly common among people who are struggling financially. The irony is that people who engage in knowledge hoarding often have more financial information than people who are financially successful. But information without implementation is decoration. The sixth behavior is income ceiling creation. This is the unconscious limitation of earning potential to match the financial set point. It shows up as undercharging for services, as turning down opportunities that would require more responsibility, as deflecting compliments about professional capabilities, as self-deprecating responses to recognition of skills, as choosing jobs and career paths that feel safe rather than those that align with highest potential. The income ceiling is invisible. The person operating under it genuinely believes their pricing is fair, their choices are reasonable, and their path is realistic. But the ceiling is there, set by the financial identity running beneath conscious awareness. The seventh behavior is the rescue fantasy. This is the quiet, persistent belief that something external is going to change everything. The right opportunity, the right person, the business idea that finally works, the investment that pays off, the break that other people seem to get. The rescue fantasy is seductive because it requires nothing of you right now. It keeps hope alive without demanding the uncomfortable work of internal change. But it also keeps you passive, waiting, watching. And the years pass while you wait for a rescue that was never coming because the thing that needed to change was never outside you. Recognizing these behaviors is the beginning of something important. But recognition without action is just another form of knowledge hoarding. The next step is understanding how to actually begin the work of rewiring. Chapter 7. The compound effect of financial beliefs. There is a principle in finance called compound interest. Most people understand it as a mathematical concept, money growing exponentially over time because each period's returns generate their own returns. What most people don't understand is that this same compounding principle applies not just to money, but to the beliefs, habits, and identity structures that create financial reality in the first place. Your financial beliefs compound, your financial behaviors compound, your financial identity compounds. And just like money, they compound in both directions. The right beliefs, consistently held and acted upon, create expanding financial reality. The wrong beliefs, consistently reinforced and acted upon, create expanding financial limitation. Think about what this means across a lifetime. If you absorbed a belief at age 8 that money is always scarce, that belief has been reinforcing itself for every year you've been alive since. Every time you experienced financial scarcity, which your brain's pattern matching made more likely, that scarcity confirmed the original belief. Every time you spoke or thought the language of limitation, you strengthened the neural pathways that make limitation feel inevitable. Every time you engaged in the 7 behaviors of financially stuck people, you reinforced the behavioral patterns that make those beliefs operational. By the time most people reach adulthood, they have decades of compounded financial limitation operating in their minds. Decades of reinforced beliefs, strengthened neural pathways, and deeply grooved behavioral patterns. And they wonder why a few months of trying to change their financial habits doesn't produce lasting results. They wonder why the motivation fades, why the progress stalls, why they keep returning to the same financial reality they were trying to escape. The answer is compound interest, but working against them instead of for them. This sounds discouraging, but here is what should electrify you. Compound interest works in both directions with equal power. The same mechanism that has been compounding your financial limitations can compound your financial growth. The neural pathways that have been strengthened by years of limiting beliefs can be weakened through consistent non-use, while new pathways are strengthened through consistent practice. The behavioral loops that have been reinforcing financial limitation can be broken and replaced with loops that reinforce financial expansion. But this requires understanding something that most people refuse to accept. The compounding of financial beliefs is slow in the beginning, almost imperceptibly slow. And this is where most people quit. They make changes for a few weeks or months. They don't see dramatic results. They conclude that change isn't working and return to old patterns. And in doing so, they restart the compounding of limitation at an even stronger baseline. The people who break through financially are not the ones with the most dramatic turnarounds. They are the ones with the most consistent commitments. They understand that they are planting seeds whose growth will be invisible for months before it becomes undeniable. They don't need to see the compound effect to trust the compound effect. They keep going because they understand the math, and the math always wins. Every belief you change, every behavior you shift, every identity story you rewrite is an investment in a compound return that will not show up immediately, but it will show up. If you stay in the process long enough, the compound interest of a new financial identity becomes undeniable. The question is whether you can sustain the commitment through the invisible phase. Most people can't. The people who can are the ones who change their financial reality for good. Chapter 8. Rewiring the Broke Brain. The Neuroscience of Financial Transformation. Your brain can change. This is not a motivational statement. It is a scientific fact. Neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to reorganize its structure, form new connections, and modify existing ones based on experience, is one of the most profound discoveries in modern neuroscience. And it means that the neural architecture that has been maintaining your financial limitation is not permanent. It is not fixed. It can be rewired. But rewiring requires understanding exactly how neural change occurs. Because the common understanding of habit change, which suggests that repetition alone is sufficient to create new neural pathways, is incomplete. Repetition is necessary but not sufficient. What determines the speed and depth of neural rewiring is the combination of repetition, emotional intensity, and identity integration. Let's break each of these down. Repetition establishes frequency. Every time you engage in a new thought pattern or behavior, you use the neural pathway associated with that pattern. Every time you use it, you slightly strengthen it. Think of it as walking through a field of grass. The first time you walk a path, you barely leave a trace. But with each repeated walk, the path becomes more defined, more obvious, more the natural route through the field. Financial rewiring requires the same consistent repetition, the same new thoughts, rehearsed repeatedly, the same new behaviors, practiced consistently, until the new pathways become stronger than the old ones and the brain begins to default to them naturally. Emotional intensity accelerates encoding. Your brain stores emotionally charged experiences differently than neutral ones. Highly emotional experiences are encoded faster, more deeply, and with more durability than emotionally flat ones. This is why traumatic experiences leave such lasting marks. The emotional intensity at the time of encoding drives deep neural consolidation. The same principle can be used in reverse. When you practice new financial beliefs and behaviors while generating genuine positive emotion, not forced positivity, but authentic excitement, pride, or gratitude. You accelerate the encoding process dramatically. Identity integration makes change stick. This is the most often missed component of genuine neural rewiring. Behavioral change that isn't attached to an identity shift is inherently unstable. If you change your financial behaviors while still thinking of yourself as someone who struggles with money, you've created a conflict between your actions and your identity. And your brain, in its relentless pursuit of self-consistency, will resolve that conflict by pulling your behaviors back to match your identity. This is why so many financial improvement efforts fail. They change the behavior without changing the story about who is doing the behavior. Genuine financial rewiring requires simultaneous work at 3 levels: cognitive, changing the thoughts and beliefs; behavioral, changing the actions and habits; and identity, changing the fundamental story about who you are in relationship to money. When all 3 levels change together and reinforce each other, the new neural architecture is robust enough to withstand the pull of old patterns. Without all 3, relapse is almost inevitable. The practical implication of this neuroscience is that financial transformation is not primarily about financial education. It is primarily about self-concept revision. The goal is not to become someone who knows more about money. The goal is to become someone different in relationship to money. And that becoming requires consistent, emotionally engaged, identity-integrated practice. Not just reading, not just thinking. Becoming. Chapter 9. The Identity Shift. Becoming someone who has money. You will never consistently behave in ways that contradict your fundamental sense of who you are. This is not a flaw. This is your brain doing precisely what it was designed to do, maintaining behavioral consistency with self-concept. The problem is that if your self-concept includes financial limitation as a core feature, behavioral consistency means consistently maintaining financial limitation. Chapter 9. The Identity Shift. Becoming someone who has money. You will never consistently behave in ways that contradict your fundamental sense of who you are. This is not a flaw. This is your brain doing precisely what it was designed to do, maintaining behavioral consistency with self-concept. The problem is that if your self-concept includes financial limitation as a core feature, behavioral consistency means consistently maintaining financial limitation. The former group changes who they are, and who you are determines what you do far more powerfully than any strategy, system, or information ever could. So what does it actually mean to shift your financial identity? It starts with a question that most people never ask themselves directly. Who is the person I need to become to have the financial life I want? Not what do I need to do, who do I need to become? The answer to that question reveals a specific set of qualities, beliefs, and ways of operating in the world that define the financially successful version of you. Maybe that person is someone who checks their finances regularly without anxiety, someone who makes decisions from abundance rather than scarcity, someone who invests in themselves without guilt, someone who charges what their skills are genuinely worth, someone who thinks in terms of assets rather than expenses, someone who sees financial challenges as problems to solve rather than evidence of inevitable failure. Once you have a clear picture of who that person is, the next step is to begin acting from that identity now. Not after you have more money, not after you feel more confident, not after circumstances improve. Now, with the resources you currently have, in the circumstances you currently face. This is not about pretending you're someone you're not. It is about choosing the identity you're growing into and beginning to inhabit it before you have the external evidence to confirm it. Because the external evidence always follows the internal identity, never the other way around. Every financial decision you make from this point forward should be run through one filter. What would the financially empowered version of me do here? Not what feels comfortable, not what feels familiar. What would the person I'm becoming do? And then do that. Repeatedly, consistently, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. Because discomfort is not a sign that you're doing it wrong. Discomfort is the sensation of your identity expanding beyond its previous limits. It's the feeling of the old neural pathways losing their grip while new ones are being built. It is, in the most literal neurological sense, the feeling of becoming someone new. Chapter 10. Practical Protocols for Reprogramming Your Financial Mind. Understanding the neuroscience and psychology of financial limitation is essential. But understanding alone changes nothing. What changes things is implementation. What changes things is daily practice. What changes things is the consistent application of specific protocols that begin to build the new neural architecture of financial empowerment. These protocols are not financial advice. They are psychological interventions. They work at the level of belief, identity, and neural pattern, the level where financial transformation actually begins. The first protocol is the morning financial identity declaration. Every morning, before you engage with the demands of the day, spend 5 minutes deliberately inhabiting the identity of the financially empowered version of yourself. This is not affirmations in the generic sense. It is specific, emotionally engaged declaration of who you are becoming. Speak in the present tense. Use specific detail. Generate genuine feeling as you speak. Not "I am going to be wealthy someday," but "I am someone who makes decisions from financial strength. I understand how money works. I invest in my growth without apology. I charge what my skills are worth. I build assets, not just income." The specificity and the emotional engagement are what make this practice neurologically effective. Vague, emotionally flat repetition creates weak neural pathways. Specific, emotionally rich declaration creates strong ones. Not "I am going to be wealthy someday," but "I am someone who makes decisions from financial strength. I understand how money works. I invest in my growth without apology. I charge what my skills are worth. I build assets, not just income." The specificity and the emotional engagement are what make this practice neurologically effective. Vague, emotionally flat repetition creates weak neural pathways. Specific, emotionally rich declaration creates strong ones. The second protocol is financial reality engagement. This is the deliberate practice of facing your financial reality regularly and without avoidance. Every week, without exception, open your accounts, review your spending, examine your financial position, not to judge yourself, not to feel bad, but to stay in conscious contact with your financial reality so that your brain stops treating it as a threat to be avoided and begins to treat it as information to be worked with. Avoidance is the enemy of financial clarity, and financial clarity is the foundation of financial change. You cannot navigate a map you refuse to look at. The third protocol is belief documentation and interruption. Keep a notebook, physical or digital, dedicated to catching your financial thoughts. Every time you notice a limiting financial belief arising, a thought about what's impossible for someone like you, or what money does to people, or why getting ahead is futile for your particular situation, write it down. Then write the direct contradiction of that belief, the factual rebuttal, the evidence that the belief is not objectively true. Repeat the rebuttal until it lands with genuine conviction. This process does two things simultaneously. It brings unconscious beliefs into conscious awareness where they can be examined and challenged. And it begins building the neural pathways of alternative beliefs through repetition. Over time, the rebuttal becomes more automatic than the original limitation. That is rewiring in practice. The fourth protocol is behavior-first identity building. Pick one behavior that the financially empowered version of you would do consistently. that your current self doesn't do. Not 10 behaviors. 1. It might be automatically transferring a specific amount to savings every week before spending anything. It might be researching one income-generating skill for 30 minutes every day. It might be tracking every dollar spent without exception. It might be reaching out to one professional contact every week to build your earning-related network. Whatever the behavior is, do it consistently for 90 days. Because 90 days of consistent behavior is enough to begin the neurological process of identity revision. When you maintain a behavior that contradicts your old identity, your brain begins to update its story about who you are. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, but the update happens, and as the identity story updates, other behaviors consistent with the new identity begin to feel natural rather than forced. The 5th protocol is environment engineering. Your brain operates within environmental context, and environmental context powerfully influences neural pattern activation. If your environment is full of cues that reinforce your old financial identity, the spending triggers, the social circles of financial limitation, the media consumption that reinforces scarcity thinking, those cues will constantly be activating the neural networks you're trying to deactivate. Engineer your environment to support the identity you're building. Not perfectly, progressively. Remove or reduce the most powerful cues of your old financial identity. Introduce cues that activate your new one. The books, the communities, the conversations, the inputs that reinforce the story of who you're becoming rather than who you've been. Chapter 11. The Social Mirror. How your circle is keeping you broke. You are the financial average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. This is not a motivational cliché. It is a measurable social and neurological phenomenon. Your brain continuously calibrates its model of what's normal, what's achievable, and what people like you do, based primarily on the people you are in closest proximity to. And if the people you're closest to share your financial set point, their presence is one of the most powerful forces maintaining your financial limitation. This is not about judging your relationships. The people around you are not sabotaging you intentionally. They are simply being who they are, and your brain is using them as reference points for who you are. When everyone you know lives paycheck to paycheck, living paycheck to paycheck feels normal. When everyone in your circle speaks the language of scarcity, scarcity thinking feels like realism. When everyone around you has given up on financial ambition starts to feel like delusion. The social mirror is powerful for 2 reasons. The first is neurological. Mirror neurons, brain cells that fire both when you perform an action and when you observe someone else performing it, create a deep unconscious mirroring of the emotional states, beliefs, and behavioral patterns of the people around you. You don't just observe their financial reality, your brain begins to enact it. Their patterns literally begin to replicate in your neural architecture. The second reason is identity. Your sense of self is constructed in significant part through social comparison and social belonging. If the group you belong to defines itself partly through financial struggle, through shared complaints about money, shared beliefs about the impossibility of wealth, shared contempt for those who have achieved it, then departing from that financial reality means departing from the group. And your brain treats social exclusion as one of the most serious threats it faces. It will pull you back to the group's financial level to protect your sense of belonging. This is why financial transformation so often requires social transformation. Not abandoning your relationships, but expanding your social context to include people operating at a higher financial level, people who speak the language of abundance, people who make financial growth feel normal, people whose presence calibrates your brain's sense of what's possible toward expansion rather than limitation. This expansion doesn't have to be physical. It can begin through books, through communities, through content, through mentorship, through any form of consistent exposure to the mindsets, language, and realities of people who have built the financial life you want. Your brain doesn't fully distinguish between the influence of physical proximity and the influence of sustained mental immersion. What matters is that the exposure is consistent enough to begin recalibrating the social mirror. Surround yourself, physically and mentally, with the financial reality you want to inhabit. And watch what happens to what your brain begins to believe is normal for you. Chapter 12. The New Financial Identity. Who you become when the program changes. There is a version of you that doesn't exist yet. A version that makes financial decisions from clarity rather than fear. That builds wealth as a natural expression of who they are, rather than as an exhausting struggle against who they've been programmed to be. That looks at their bank account not with anxiety, but with the quiet confidence of someone who understands exactly where they are, exactly where they're going, and exactly what they're doing to get there. That version of you is not a fantasy, it is your factory setting. The person you would have been if you had never been conditioned into financial limitation. If you had absorbed from birth the beliefs, the language, the identity of someone who builds wealth naturally. The rewiring you're doing now is not creating something new. It is removing the layers of conditioning that covered what was always there. The financially liberated version of you thinks differently. They see money as a tool rather than a scorecard. They think in assets and investments rather than expenses and consumption. They make financial decisions based on where they want to be in 10 years, rather than what feels good in the next 10 minutes. They invest in their own development without guilt because they understand that the highest return on investment available to any human being is the return on investing in themselves. They speak differently. They don't use the language of scarcity, limitation, or victimhood around money. They don't say, "I could never afford that." They ask, "How could I afford that?" They don't say, "That's for rich people." They say, "What would someone who builds wealth do here?" The language shift sounds small. The neural impact is profound. They relate to failure differently. When a financial strategy doesn't work, they treat it as data, as one more piece of information about what doesn't work, which brings them closer to what does. They don't interpret financial setbacks as confirmation of their unworthiness. They interpret them as tuition, expensive sometimes, but always instructional. They relate to success differently. When financial growth happens, they don't sabotage it. They don't feel guilty about it. They don't spend it immediately to return to a comfortable level of scarcity. They allow it. They build on it. They use it as evidence that who they're becoming is real, that the new identity is taking hold. This version of you is built in the small moments. The moment you check your account when anxiety says to look away. The moment you invest in your skills when fear says it's too risky. The moment you ask for what you're worth when the old identity says to be grateful for what you have. The moment you redirect comfort spending toward asset building when dopamine says you deserve a reward right now. Every one of these moments is a vote for who you're becoming. And votes accumulate. They compound. They build a new neural majority. And eventually, not overnight, not in a week, not even in a month, but eventually, the new identity doesn't have to be chosen consciously anymore. It simply is who you are. That is the destination, not a number in a bank account. An identity. A way of being in relationship to money that generates wealth as naturally as your old identity generated limitation. A financial operating system that works for you rather than against you. You've spent years, possibly decades, running the program that kept you broke. The program that told you this was normal, that this was the ceiling, that people like you don't get to build something different. That program had decades to compound. Give the new one 90 days of consistent commitment, and then another 90, and then another. Watch what the compound effect of a new financial identity creates in your life when you stop fighting it and start building it. The choice that decides everything. You started this with an uncomfortable question. At what point do you stop blaming what's outside you and start examining what's inside you? You now know the answer. The answer is now. The answer has always been now. Because now is the only place change actually happens. Everything in this audiobook has pointed to a single truth. Your financial reality is not a verdict on your worth. It is not evidence of your limitations. It is not your destiny. It is a program that was installed without your conscious consent, reinforced without your deliberate choice, and compounded without your full awareness. And like any program, it can be identified, interrupted, and rewritten. You now understand the financial thermostat and how it pulls you back to your set point. You understand the neuroscience of the dopamine trap, cortisol avoidance, and neurological pattern matching. You know the 7 behaviors of financially stuck people and can recognize them in yourself. You understand how beliefs compound in both directions. You know what identity level change requires and why it's the only change that sticks. You have everything you need to begin, not to succeed overnight, not to eliminate every limiting belief by morning, but to begin, to take the first step of consistent daily practice that compounds, slowly, invisibly, then suddenly, into a fundamentally different financial reality. Most people who hear this will feel something shift in this moment, a brief surge of clarity, a genuine desire to change. And then they will return to their life, and the old patterns will reclaim them. Because motivation is not enough. Clarity in the moment is not enough. What is required is a decision, a real one, not a hope or a wish or an intention. A decision that today is the day the old program stops running unchallenged. That today is the day the rewiring begins. The people who are going to build something different from this moment forward are not the ones who feel the most inspired right now. They are the ones who will still be doing the work 90 days from now, still practicing the morning declaration, still engaging with financial reality without avoidance, still interrupting the limiting beliefs, still choosing behaviors consistent with the identity they're building, even on the days it feels pointless, even on the days the old patterns scream the loudest, even on the days when progress is invisible. Those are the people who break through, not because they were smarter, luckier, or more talented, because they committed to the process and refused to stop. Your brain has been addicted to staying broke, but addictions can be broken. Neural pathways can be rebuilt. Identities can be transformed. Financial realities can be changed from the inside out. The only question left is the one you started with. At what point do you stop waiting for something outside you to change and start changing the only thing that was ever in your control? The answer is yours. The time is now.